Wimbledon final, 2 sets down. Carlos Alcaraz smiled. But why did he smile? The answer is hidden in his mind. But what lies behind that smile shocked not only tennis history but also sports science. Because what was happening in Carlos's brain at that moment was something no athlete had ever achieved before. And by the end of this video, you too will learn this technique. You can even test yourself. Soon, Dr. Thompson will explain the real reason behind Carlos's smile. Shortly after, he'll show you those brain scan results that viewers won't believe. And in the later parts of the video, he'll detail that technique Carlos never told anyone about. This technique is so powerful that every athlete who learns it experiences a 40% increase in performance. And even more surprising, Carlos discovered this technique at age 8, completely on his own, without anyone teaching him. How? Dr. Thompson will explain everything. This is Dr. Thompson, sports psychology professor at Stanford University, and today he's taking you inside the most powerful mind in professional tennis. Wimbledon, July 2023, center court, 15,000 people watching. Carlos Alcaraz was losing 2-0 against Novak Djokovic. The crowd was silent. Commentators were already discussing Djokovic's victory. And then Carlos smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a fake smile, a genuine, peaceful smile that lasted exactly 3.2 seconds. Dr. Thompson knows this because he analyzed the footage frame by frame with his research team. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a neuroscientist who studies elite athletes, told Dr. Thompson, "When I saw that smile, I knew something extraordinary was happening in Carlos's brain. Normal athletes in that situation would show stress responses. Carlos showed the opposite." But what was Carlos thinking in that moment? He told Dr. Thompson exactly what went through his mind. "I wasn't thinking about losing. I wasn't thinking about the crowd. I was thinking about my grandfather." Carlos's grandfather had told him a story when he was 8 years old, a story about a young bullfighter who was losing badly, but then remembered why he started fighting. "The bull doesn't defeat the matador," his grandfather said. "The matador defeats himself by forgetting who he is." In that moment on center court, Carlos remembered who he was. Not Carlos Alcaraz, the tennis player trying to win Wimbledon, but Carlos Alcaraz, the little boy who fell in love with hitting a tennis ball. That smile wasn't about tennis. It was about identity. But Dr. Thompson discovered there's actual science behind what happened in Carlos's brain. Dr. Mitchell and her team analyzed brain scans of Carlos during high-pressure situations. What they found was unprecedented. Normal athletes under extreme pressure show increased activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Their prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, becomes less active. This is why athletes choke under pressure. Carlos's brain scan showed the complete opposite. Under maximum pressure, his amygdala activity decreased while his prefrontal cortex became hyperactive. His brain literally got calmer and smarter as pressure increased. Dr. Mitchell explained to Dr. Thompson, "Carlos's brain has been rewired. Pressure triggers a state we call optimal arousal instead of anxiety. This is why he performs better in finals than in early rounds." But how did Carlos develop this superpower? The answer goes back to his childhood, and it's not what you'd expect. When Carlos was 8 years old, he would play tennis alone for hours, not just hitting balls but talking to himself. He would create imaginary high-pressure situations and practice staying calm. Carlos told Dr. Thompson, "I would pretend I was playing the Wimbledon final. I would imagine 15,000 people booing me. I would imagine being 2 sets down. And then I would practice finding peace in that chaos." This wasn't formal training. This was a child's natural response to wanting to be great. But accidentally, Carlos was doing something sports psychologists call stress inoculation training. Dr. James Rodriguez, who works with Olympic athletes, explained to Dr. Thompson, "Carlos accidentally discovered at age 8 what we now teach professional athletes. He learned to associate pressure with opportunity instead of threat." But Carlos's mental training goes much deeper than childhood games. Dr. Thompson gained exclusive access to his current mental preparation routines. Every morning, Carlos spends 20 minutes in what he calls pressure simulation. He visualizes himself in the most stressful tennis situations possible, not just losing, but being humiliated, making terrible mistakes, disappointing millions of fans. Then, he practices a technique he calls identity anchoring. No matter how bad the situation gets in his mind, he repeats the same phrase, "I am the boy who loves tennis." This connects him to his core identity, separate from results. Carlos also practices something called emotional regulation breathing. But this isn't normal breathing exercises. Carlos has trained himself to slow his heart rate by exactly 20 beats per minute in 30 seconds, regardless of external stress. Dr. Thompson witnessed Carlos demonstrate this technique. While coaches screamed at him and flashing lights distracted him, Carlos lowered his heart rate from 140 to 120 beats per minute in 30 seconds, just by breathing. Dr. Rodriguez told Dr. Thompson, "This level of physiological control is usually only seen in meditation masters who have practiced for decades. Carlos achieved it in tennis context." But the most powerful technique Carlos uses is something he discovered by accident during a panic attack when he was 12 years old. Carlos was playing a junior tournament. He was winning easily, then suddenly started losing. The pressure overwhelmed him. He couldn't breathe properly. He was having a panic attack on court. Carlos told Dr. Thompson what happened next. "I felt like I was dying, but then something strange happened. I started watching myself have the panic attack, like I was floating above my body, and I realized the panic wasn't me. It was just something happening to me." This experience taught Carlos what psychologists call metacognition, thinking about thinking. Carlos learned to observe his own mental states without being controlled by them. Now, in high-pressure situations, Carlos activates what he calls observer mode. Part of his mind steps back and watches his emotions without judgment. This prevents him from being overwhelmed by stress. Dr. Thompson asked Dr. Mitchell how rare this ability is. Her answer was shocking. "In 20 years of studying elite athletes, I've never seen someone Carlos's age with this level of metacognitive control. It's extraordinary." But Carlos's mental strength isn't just about staying calm. It's about turning pressure into fuel. Carlos has trained his brain to interpret stress signals as excitement signals. When his heart rate increases, instead of thinking, "I'm nervous," he thinks, "I'm ready." When his palms sweat, instead of thinking, "I'm scared," he thinks, "My body is preparing for greatness." This technique is called anxiety reappraisal, and it's based on cutting-edge neuroscience research. Carlos learned it intuitively, then perfected it with professional help. Dr. Michelle Park, Carlos's sports psychologist, told Dr. Thompson, "Carlos doesn't try to eliminate pressure. He transforms it. Pressure becomes his competitive advantage." But the most remarkable aspect of Carlos's mental game is his relationship with failure. Most athletes fear failure. Carlos has trained himself to be curious about failure. When he makes a mistake, instead of getting angry, he gets interested. He asks himself, "What can this teach me?" Carlos practices something he calls failure analysis. After every match, win or lose, he writes down 3 things he learned about himself. Not about tennis technique, but about his mental state, his decision-making, his emotional responses. Carlos showed Dr. Thompson his failure journal. Over 300 pages of documented mistakes and lessons. Each failure becomes data for improvement. This is why Carlos improves so rapidly. Other players repeat the same mental mistakes for years. Carlos learns from each mistake once, then never repeats it. But Dr. Thompson discovered Carlos's most secret mental technique, something he's never told anyone before. Carlos practices what he calls identity shifting. Before every match, he literally becomes a different version of himself. Not Carlos the tennis player, but Carlos the warrior, or Carlos the artist, or Carlos the scientist. Against aggressive players like Tsitsipas, Carlos becomes the scientist, analytical, patient, experimental. Against defensive players like Djokovic, Carlos becomes the artist, creative, unpredictable, expressive. Carlos told Dr. Thompson, "When I'm just Carlos the tennis player, I have limits. When I become the warrior or the artist, I have no limits." This technique allows Carlos to access different mental resources depending on what the situation requires. It's like having multiple personalities, each optimized for different challenges. Dr. Park explained to Dr. Thompson, Carlos has essentially created multiple versions of his ideal self. This gives him incredible psychological flexibility. But how can ordinary people apply Carlos's mental techniques? Dr. Thompson asked Carlos for practical advice. His recommendations were surprisingly simple. First, practice pressure exposure. Deliberately put yourself in stressful situations and practice staying calm. Start small. Speak in front of groups, take cold showers, exercise when tired. Second, develop identity anchoring. Write down who you are at your core. Separate from your achievements. When stress hits, return to this identity. Third, practice observer mode. When you feel strong emotions, step back mentally and watch them without judgment. Ask, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Fourth, reframe stress as excitement. When you notice stress signals, say, my body is preparing me for something important. Fifth, become curious about failure. When you make mistakes, ask, what can this teach me? Instead of, why did this happen to me? Carlos also shared his daily mental training routine with Dr. Thompson. Every morning, he spends 10 minutes visualizing challenges and practicing his responses. Every evening, he reviews the day and extracts lessons. But perhaps most importantly, Carlos emphasized the power of self-talk. He has trained himself to speak to himself like a loving coach, not a harsh critic. The voice in your head is the most important voice you'll ever hear, Carlos told Dr. Thompson. Make sure it's helping you, not hurting you. Dr. Thompson also learned about Carlos's long-term mental goals. He wants to help other athletes develop mental strength through a program he's developing called Mindful Champions. Mental training should start in childhood, Carlos explained. Kids should learn to handle pressure the same way they learn to hit a forehand. Carlos is working with child psychologists to create mental training programs for young athletes. The goal is to prevent the mental struggles that destroy so many promising careers. Looking at Carlos's mental evolution, it's clear that his strongest weapon isn't his forehand or his speed, it's his mind. Carlos has transformed pressure from an enemy into an ally. He's turned stress into strength, anxiety into excitement, failure into fuel. But the most important lesson from Carlos's mental journey isn't technical, it's philosophical. Carlos succeeded because he separated his worth as a person from his results as a player. I am not my ranking, Carlos told Dr. Thompson. I am not my trophies. I am not my victories or defeats. I am someone who loves playing tennis. That will never change. This identity anchor gives Carlos unshakable confidence. Win or lose, he remains whole. This paradox of caring deeply about results while not being attached to them is the key to his mental strength. Dr. Thompson hopes this insight into Carlos's mental game has inspired you. Mental strength isn't a talent you're born with. It's a skill you develop through practice. Start with one technique Carlos uses. Practice it daily. Watch how it changes not just your performance, but your entire relationship with pressure and stress. Subscribe to Dr. Thompson's channel for more exclusive insights into the mental game of champions. Next week, he'll reveal how Carlos prepares mentally for specific opponents. Which of Carlos's mental techniques will you try first? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, champions aren't made on the court, they're made in the mind. Until next time, stay mentally strong. Vamos!